Okay, fantastic. We are live now. So welcome back, everyone, and thank you for coming. I know it's a very busy time everywhere with everyone marking and exam boards and all kinds of stuff. So we're very grateful to Fiona Truscott and John Mitchell from UCL Engineering for coming with us to just chat for a little bit about project-based learning. So Fiona and John have been doing this for a while. In economics, we don't obviously have a lot of project-based learning, but we have things that are kind of similar around the ends and edges and so on. But I know that you guys do have quite a bit of experience, so it would be great for us to sort of learn from you. And these sessions they're fairly informal. They are called EconTEAching seminars, but we do have people from other subjects coming also, because I mean, we do have more in common, right? So it's always a good chance to say that. Fantastic. So if I can just start by asking you sort of what you understand project-based learning to be.
Okay. Shall I take a start of that? So I mean, project-based learning is one of, I guess, of many possible sort of active and authentic learning techniques that people apply. I think it's obviously particularly applicable for engineering. It started in medicine. A lot of vocational subjects have taken it on because it builds the student-centered activity around the basis of a project. And in engineering, the concept of a project is very real. And one of the things that's always the case with project-based learning is, well, in an ideal world, what you're asking the students to do is authentic. It's something that feels like something that's very much connected to something an expert in the discipline would be doing, a professional in the discipline would be doing. And I think to economics, that probably has a lot of could talk a lot to the sort of things that people would do. We typically do them in teams, and project-based learning is usually in teams because that's the format of a project. And one of the things that perhaps differentiates it from something like problem-based learning, whereas you can do individual problem-based learning as well, although again that's not quite so common. But it's that idea of structuring a course of learning around this theme of developing often a design project or some sort of project where often you're working towards some form of deliverable. And I guess that's the other thing to note, that there's usually a more definitive outcome. I guess to differentiate from problem-based learning, the aim of often in problem-based learning is to explore the problem and to understand the problem sphere much more. This moves much more firmly to emphasize the solution to that problem and the process of getting to a solution as part of a project.
Yeah, like you said, it sounds always like, project means it lends itself to something like engineering, architecture, things like that, where you will be working on projects. But it is, typically we tell our students in economics all the time that, this life that you follow in university is quite strange, because apart from literally academics in the ivory tower, no one else works by themselves and detached from everyone else. So you will have to work together. Fiona, I guess the question for us always is in terms of, these are all fantastic ideas, sound super good, and especially the authenticity of the design is amazing, but can it work in my context? So can you tell us a little bit about what the context is, how many students, who they are, and how you structured the projects?
Yeah. So for all our, or vast majority of our undergraduate degrees in engineering faculty, they're all attached to something called the Integrated Engineering Programme. And it's kind of a philosophy. And the main central core of the programme is project work, and kind of having loads and loads of instances of project work. So the big one that I run is called Engineering Challenges. We run it in the first term with our first years. Literally from day one, we go, hi, come and do some project work with us. And it covers 7 departments within the faculty. Usually it's somewhere in the region of 700 to 800 students. Last year it was over 1,000. And we work on kind of 2 projects within that module. So we do a department-based project and we do an interdisciplinary project. So we pair up our students, our departments. Computer science works with electrical, civil works with mechanical to work on aspects of one big project that we talk about. But we also do throughout the first and second years, we do things called scenarios, which are 1 week intensive projects. The challenges happens across a term and students are doing other modules alongside it. Scenarios are 1 week projects, nothing else happens, no lectures, nothing else. And they're in teams and they've got to produce something in a week. And that can be kind of, you know, an oil and gas company comes and says, I have a problem, can you fix it? Do you want to build a pipe climbing device in mechanical? So they do a fantastic kind of 2 sets of the system where they design it 1 week and then build it the next week. And they have a budget, and you can only spend, I think, like 20 quid or something to build this thing. So we kind of do those all the way through. And then at the end of the second year, we do what's called How to Change the World, which is a big interdisciplinary thing. So instead of just being departments paired up, you'll probably typically have students from 4 or 5 different departments in a team, and they're given a big challenge. So I've worked on it before and I've said, okay, there's pollution in the Thames. What are you going to do about it? Pick the aspect that you want to work on and kind of do it. So we do that with, again, about 800 students. We do it quite on scale, and we do it kind of, some is department based, some is kind of cohort across the entire cohort based, and that can be challenging because I've sat in a lot of talks where people go, we're doing it with a lot of people, we're doing it with 100 students. 100 students is a lot, but you can do it on scale as well. Yeah, definitely.
That last point is really great because, I mean, we have that same experience. People will say, I have 150 people. I was like, yeah, we have 800. Great. So being able to scale up is really, really important. I guess coming back to just sort of unpacking some of the things that you said. So you said that a client comes in and says, build this thing or the other. Do you have a systematic way of coming up with the projects, like the project themes? And also, how do you actually break up students into groups? Is it self-selected? Do the students then, are they able to select from a list of projects, or is all of it assigned?
So I think because of the size that we work with, we assign students to projects. We don't, I mean, I know some people in departments do a kind of pick your top 3 areas and we'll give you a project. But certainly on the stuff like challenges and how to change the world, students get assigned a project. Typically for scenarios, they tend to only, because it's a week long, it's just everyone does the same kind of scenario. You might have slightly different kind of conditions that you have to fulfill, but it's the same overall scenario. And in terms of coming up with projects, we do kind of, we kind of try all different things, really. So we sometimes, like How to Change the World uses the UN Sustainable Goals as a framing device for their projects. So they use those as themes, and then they find an external partner that can kind of come in with maybe a project or an idea or a kind of the thing that they're currently working on. In challenges, our departmental based projects are based a lot on research that's happening within the department. So quite a few of them have lab visits, or they get to talk to researchers. So it's what's happening in the department. Our global health one is one of these grand kind of challenges that UCL has, and we've kind of kept that quite similar because there's actually quite a lot. Even if you keep the same scenario, you get kind of different stuff every single time. Departments might work with a company that they have an existing relationship with. The pipe climbing device competition is with the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, so they have a competition nationwide that this feeds into. So we kind of try everything. Any idea we can come up with, really, in terms of getting a project, I think.
I think just to add to that, I mean, one of the things that was a concern of staff early on is, we're going to have to reinvent these every year. And actually what you find, because it's not sort of an exam, you're not sort of necessarily so focused on just the outcome. Actually, you're looking at the process. We find that many of these can be repeated year on year, and it's much less of a problem to do that than it would be for a natural piece of coursework. So there are some scenarios that they might be I think one is being refreshed this year, but I know at least one that was, originally set in 2014, and there's tinkering. We've changed it slightly, but year on year, the students run through the same thing again. And you know, I mentioned authenticity at the beginning. There is a balance there, though, of bringing, when you bring industry into them, because you know, we found, I think, a sort of happy balance of a partnership. Certainly with some of the early How to Change the World, we tried to get, you know, non-government organisations, charities and things to set the project. That didn't work so well, often because they have a very focused idea of what they want out of it that doesn't really always meet the academic outcomes of what you want. And so we've got now to a much slightly more nuanced partnership model where we're taking ideas from the company, but we're forming it into something that we know will work academically for the time period we've got, and they advise on it. And that seems to work quite well, because I think they get something out of it. The organisations get something out of it. I think the students get a lot out of it. Biochemical engineers re-engineer an ice cream plant has been a favourite for many years now, with their visit to Procter and Gamble in Bedford, which they all seem to like.
I have got on that one. It's excellent. Free ice cream.
But those sorts of things, I think, that really give that context, because it is a chance to bring together. You know, one of the reasons we did it originally was it's you know, modularization as an administrative tool in academia is very useful. It's nice to put things into boxes, all the same size boxes that you know, it's very, very convenient. But that's not how knowledge is formed, and that's not how we want students to learn. And so very much the scenarios are deliberately there to try and break that modularization and get the students to realize that in doing anything useful with the knowledge, they've got to take a bit of knowledge from there and a bit of knowledge from there, and it's not just once you've done the exam for that bit you forget it. And you know, and we very deliberately go back previous years. You know, we tell them that the scenario is potentially testing them on everything that they've done up until that point. And that's quite a challenge to the students, but I think it does try and make these connections. And it's, you know, I think as a teaching experience, it's very interesting to watch. You know, you can almost watch synapses fire and connections being made in the head in some of these things. And you know, as you said, we said at the beginning, it works across engineering, but also, you know, management science have used the 8 scenario model, and you know, they have, you know, things around big data, data analytic type projects that they've run with partners that you know, so you know, quite a lot of scope for pushing it further.
Yeah, I think you know, you're absolutely right that, you know, these projects, someone said on here also, you know, that's how we work in a lot of different environments. So it's very easy to sort of transfer them to those kinds of environments. There's a few things that I'll come back to, but there's a question about the linking up with external partners is obviously, you know, a key part of making it authentic. And like you said, you know, there's a balance, but that linking up is really important. Do you have partners that you work with in any case? Did you have to go out and seek partners specifically for these projects? How did that work?
Okay.
Well, I was going to say it's a mix. So some come from the departments, and they're partners that the departments have long-term kind of partnerships with on the research side, and kind of bring them into the teaching. Sometimes you kind of go to people and you see projects that are interesting and you want to try and get them involved. So the project that I did with How to Change the World was we tried to get Thames Tideway in. We went to them and said, we're really interested in what you're doing with this massive sewer in London. Can we get you involved? Unfortunately, they couldn't, but I ended up, because it's also really, people kind of assume that an external partner has to be external to UCL. And actually there's some interesting internal external relationships you can get in. So I ended up walking into the I can't remember their full name, but they're in Bedford Way, like the Thames Partnership or something, I think. And I seen their office, assigned to their office, and I just walked in and went, hello, we've got this project, would you come? And you know, so you can have these kind of internal external people come in, and I think that one's really interesting, and we've not explored that as much as I think we could do.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, a lot of base. I mean, it is interesting. UCL's name does carry some weight in this area with partners. Fortunately, I think we're in a very should acknowledge we're in a very privileged position to work with external organisations. Yeah,
I think, but yeah, that's an important point to keep in keep in mind, I think UCL itself is so big and there are so many sort of arm's length relationships already that we probably don't see because we see the academic units only, right? So that's really important. There's a couple of questions about students, so we'll come to that in just a second. But if we can start with the module leads and their role in all of this. So from the very beginning, you know, conceptualizing, designing, supporting, what do they do? Do you have a model for what lecturers do, or does it depend on the year and the people involved?
It depends. I mean, the projects progress as the students go through. I mean, I remember the first time we did How to Change the World as a pilot. I still get laughed at because it was a pilot. We only had 500 students the first time. The one thing we didn't know how to do was do it at scale. I mean, what's the point of piloting with small numbers? But the students hadn't done many projects. The IEP was just coming in at that point. So, and we've seen it progress. And now the students turn up and you try and scaffold them. They've done this, their 9th project. They're just like, go away. We know what we're doing. Leave us alone and we'll get on with it. So I think, yeah, it does very much depend on what stage in the process are. There's a lot more scaffolding. You know, we generally ask staff to think about milestones. You can't just give a problem over. You know, I've often described it as sort of you've thrown the students into the swimming pool and you've got to be at the side with the life rafts almost. You are trying to challenge them, and you know, that first morning where they see the question and have got no idea how to move on with it, you know, that really is a challenge. But you as a staff member are there to provide prompts and support but also putting checkpoints throughout it. I mean, I think one of the things the staff find, you know, and the students, it is intensive in that week. You are on call a lot, you know, for the week-long ones. I mean, it probably the 5-week ones are a little bit different, but it's still quite on call. Because I think certainly the students, because it feels so big and open-ended, get very concerned if they lose their way, and you've got to keep them on the path. But you know, the nice thing is, you know, certainly with the scenarios, there's no marking on. We try and get all the marking done in the week. We don't like to have things hanging over because it is so intense. You want to get finished. So you set up the project, write the brief, probably test it. It's hard, you know. One of the worst things that happen is you write what you think is a good project and then everyone misinterprets it. So, you know, you get a bit of testing, but then it is mainly that support. And, you know, usually we find if you can, you know, get the assessment done in the time period as well, yeah, it really does aid things. So, yeah, they're quite nicely self-contained in a way, but quite full on for the period that they're there.
And do you, actually before that, how many, I mean, we said, you know, 800 students, how many staff members do you typically have working on these projects to support the students?
Yeah, so the format we have for the modules is kind of, I guess, slightly unusual, because we have a module lead, which is faculty level. So I'm module lead for engineering challenges, but that actually means I'm not very much in the classroom. I do a lot of the kind of overall vision, the coordination, the kind of supporting all the other members of staff who teach on them. So we have departmental leads who are 1 or 2 people, usually from each department that's in the module, and they're in the classroom doing it. So they're the ones who are kind of at the coalface, but I tend to be like, okay, how do we come to the structure in? And then for other modules, I'm in the classroom being the teaching lead for other stuff. So in terms of members of staff for challenges, we have something like 15, I think, departmental leads. We then also have something in the region of about 35 PGTAs, and we couldn't do it without PGTAs. We always want more.
Well, this was going to be my next question actually about PGTAs, because we have an issue with PGTA excess demand as well. But I know that you guys, especially in the integrated engineering program, have fantastic PGTA training and so on and so forth. So how do you use them? How do you train them? I mean, what we often find is, so I run a team-based learning class, which has an open-ended project. And I find that sometimes PGTAs themselves find it difficult to support students because you're not telling them the answer, you're guiding them, which is not a very easy thing to do for younger people?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm not sure we've quite cracked it. We are. I mean, we always modify. We're always tinkering all the time. We get them to actually do some mini, like we do a 2-hour training session with them where we kind of get them to do a little problem and then try and get them one of them, one's doing the problem, one's doing the kind of facilitation to give them an idea. And we also talk through what we expect of them, that we don't expect them to give them the answer. And so we do a little bit of faculty level training. They also do some module training with the department leads, so they do it specifically on the content as well. But it is really tricky because it is a really different way of teaching and something that maybe then as PhD students not necessarily used to. So yeah, it is really by kind of doing almost is the only way I can really describe it.
Yeah, that's a great point. So some kind of role play or something, or putting the PGTAs through a mini project themselves or something like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
I've often found staff find it more difficult to step out from behind the lectern and not find it uncomfortable not to be the one that is in control and knows the answer. I think the PGTAs being peers are a little bit more approachable, but the idea that a member of staff doesn't directly answer the question, or and members of staff feeling that they can't necessarily answer the question in open-ended problems, I think is as much of a problem.
Yeah, and I think facilitation asks slightly different skills of you as a teacher. You've got to be a little bit like it's not just I have the information and here it is, or I'm setting the problem and I have the answers. You have to kind of nudge people, and you have to almost be like a little bit of a support counselor because we're doing teamwork, there is this potential for interpersonal skills and personal conflict, and kind of a little bit of a cheerleader of like, you can do it, it's possible. It's a different skill set, and it can be really weird if you've only ever done lecturing.
I mean, actually, for How to Change the World, we use undergraduates, so UGTAs, as we ended up calling them, who are absolutely brilliant for that reassurance. So they would have done the program the year before, and so that piece of, yes, this is a bit weird, this is a very difficult problem, but it will become clear, particularly in the first few days of it, have become very important. So it was fascinating to see that they were really surprised by the fact we put them on the panels for marking the presentations, and they were a little bit shocked by this. But actually you walk in and it was hard to tell who was the UGPT by listening, maybe not by sight, but who was the UG, who was the PG, and in some cases who was the academic member of staff. It was not always clear which was which if you didn't know better.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I have to say that I also used a student who had just gone through 3 years ago, I think, my team-based learning class as the TA. And it completely changed things. It's not about content knowledge or things like that, just credibility, I guess, in the field. That thing that John brought up that we all hate to talk about, but kind of have to talk about, assessment, marking criteria, how does it incentivize both individual effort, but also that dynamic within a group, free writing, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I guess the primary kind of way we look at this is we have a mix of individual and team assessments. So we have a team submission, so everyone in the team gets the same mark for the team assessments, and we expect all of the team to be contributing to them. For example, if we have a live presentation, if one of your team members doesn't turn up, they don't get the marks for it. That kind of thing. So, but we don't tend to individualize marks for team assessment. What we also use is something called IPAC, which I can't remember what it stands for, Individual Contribution to Teamwork. It's a piece of software that was developed in engineering, or partly in engineering, with people in engineering. And basically students peer assess everyone in the team. And so you don't get a mark for just what you think you've done. It's about what everyone thinks you've done, and that brings it together. So that's really useful because it gives students a mechanism to say, this person did a lot of work, or this person did the bare minimum of work, or this person did not turn up. and that is part of their mark as well. But it is really tricky because we've ended up in kind of what is sufficient productivity? What is sufficient engagement? It's really tricky to know because some students are really into it and really want to do over and above. They're like, I'm into it. Some of them are like, I'm not very interested. I just want to do the bare minimum because I just want the average mark for this. So it is really tricky. And on scale is really tricky. I think you'd normally, if you were in the classroom, this is one of the things that we've realized moving online, is we lost a lot of the in-classroom feel for this. We'd see the students actually doing stuff in front of us, and you would be able to, oh yeah, I can see from their body language that that team is having problems. I need to go and talk to them. I need to go and check where they are. I need to kind of chivvy the people maybe who are staring at their phone or not engaging. You don't really get that online. And that's been something we've found tricky to replicate online, and has made it tricky.
I think the other piece about teamwork is one of the things when we first started some of the early stages of this, we put people in teams and expected them to work well as a group. And I think we realized over time that actually we needed to do quite a lot to support students in their teamwork and their ability to work at teams, and just putting them together wasn't always that successful. And so actually, although there are still tensions in teams and things happen, I think there are less than perhaps before we did that. And some of the steps about we use a thing called Gallup Strength Finders, really as a conversation starter for how the teams are going to interact and work together. We do reflective pieces on their team engagement and how they work together as teams. And I think that's been really quite beneficial for trying to help the teams work together. And still, I think it's one of the things that staff report as the most difficult thing, that sort of having to step in and deal with team dynamics is the most uncomfortable thing any of us has to deal with. But I think that has really helped, as well as having some other benefits. I mean, we've had some very positive feedback, and we're doing some research at the moment about particularly neurodiverse students. And there was a standard position on SORA that they shouldn't do teamwork, which is not, I'm not sure is always that helpful, particularly because many wanted to be engaged in the program, and the program is obviously quite project based, and they're found with some other things, buddying up and other sorts of activities, we don't shuffle them between groups quite so much, but they found that actually having this conversation about how they engage with the team early on, rather than just someone leading it, has actually been quite beneficial, that people can understand their role in the team and what is expected of them, as well as others, as how they will engage.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, John, because some of the pushback that we get within economics, for example, is many academics themselves are sort of people who don't work very well in teams and are uncomfortable in teams, have, not to go too far into this, but
I know where you're going. To be honest, if I'm honest with this, and I don't say this one too often, I'm usually fairly candid, but this one I keep to myself. If I'd have had to have done this degree, I'd have hated it.
I would have loved it. I wish I'd done this.
But well, there were bits of it. I mean, there is a part. I was the sort of student who wanted to just get the knowledge and lock themselves away and study it. And there's bits of it I wouldn't have liked. I think to the question that's just come up though, about I think there is an element where there comes a point that because we do so much of it, and we can put this quite sophisticated level of support in, it works. And I think we were beginning to see that where we were doing little islands of projects, it was becoming difficult to take it any further, because it sort of, there wasn't the room, you needed to disrupt other things, but also we found, I remember I ran a project-based learning program a problem-based learning program for a while, and there's a lot of feedback from the students was we really quite enjoyed it, but actually there are much easier ways to gain marks, and so by the third year we're not taking this because and so I think these islands of things are difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of pushback for that, and the problem is, I think what that question speaks to really is that culture around it's not just an issue of preferences, right? This is the way that you need to work.
Yeah.
So if you have preferences that, don't make it easy for, or whatever, characteristics that don't make it easy for you, then we're trying to help you find a way to make it work. So this is one of the things that we face, I think, because we have isolated projects in various parts, and students feel that if I have a preference that doesn't align with that, I just avoid those rather than trying to find a way to engage with them. There's a question, there was an earlier question about, do you see any difference, because you have projects in different years, in terms of either the quality of the output or the level of engagement or anything between first years, upper year, second years, whatever, whether it depends on knowledge or getting used to teamwork or getting to know people around them? Do you see any patterns or any differences at all?
Definitely. Well, so first years, when you get to the first term and you can do some project work, they sort of look at you like, what is this thing? I don't know. And I'm just kind of blown away. I think it's the change to university, but then this completely different way of working, very different to what they're maybe used to. So definitely from first to second years, they just become more comfortable with it. I think you can even see that once they've done the first project, and then in term 2, we have more projects, they get on there and they're just more comfortable with the concept and more comfortable with the whole thing. So yeah, you can definitely see them being much more comfortable with teamwork itself and what they have to do. You don't get the kind of deer in headlights face from as many students in the second year.
And I think that's the benefit of having this strand, though, isn't it? That we have some similarities. They get used to a pattern. We try and use familiar assessment criteria that repeat. I mean, one of the things that first led to this was, my experience of supervising third-year dissertations were, a lot of the time, certainly weaker students spent a lot of time trying to work out just how to do a project, let alone actually doing the project. And it felt that was wrong in my mind, that, the capstone project of a degree should be the point where the student has the opportunity to show off what they've learned and to explore and to take it further, and where they're actually learning things that feel quite fundamental, shouldn't be happening in the third year, but they hadn't had the process. All that the first 2 years have done was stuff them full of knowledge, and actually we've sort of flipped that on its head. It was sort of, where there were projects, they were little bitty things, and then you had this big project at the end. Actually, we start with big projects and we start with big open questions, and part of that is to try and, yes, a student coming in the first year, and a lot of my colleagues said this, oh, well, they don't know anything. Actually, a lot of the students said, well, you haven't taught us anything. How can we do a project? Well, actually, what you're learning is the process of a project. We're not expecting very technically complicated outputs in the early days. That will build as time goes on. But it's that process of the project, it's the teamwork, it's the communication skills, it's lots of other things, as well as, they're not atechnical, they are technical, but not to the depth that you will get to. And I think that's that's tricky, because it feels a little disruptive to do that when, and for both staff and students, when because students often come and think, we should, I remember one banging on the table going, we should be doing maths, science and hard sums. That's what I came to engineering for. I didn't come to work in teams and write reports. No engineer does that.
I'm just laughing, as I'm sure all of my econ colleagues are as well, because that's exactly what we face as well. Yeah. What is this rubbish? Is this history or anthropology or something like that? I came here to do lots of algebra, lots of, very algorithmic algebra. That's what I'm supposed to do here. So we do suffer from that quite a bit. There was a question which goes back to what I was asking earlier about the structure of the group. So I think you did say that you do assign groups rather than students self-selecting, but also how big are the groups, and is there some range?
Yeah, so we assign for our big cohort. Some of our departments, when they work on kind of department-based stuff, will let students pick. Biochem, where I used to work before I moved to the faculty, they let you pick your first scenario, and then for your second scenario, you had to pick people who were not in your first scenario group. And then for the third scenario, it had to be more people. And I think, well, Biochem is only about 30 students a year, so they did eventually go round to the beginning. But each department does because some of the bigger departments are assigned, some of them let you pick. We do kind of everything. And in terms of group sizes across the entire IEP, we do everything from pairs to kind of 12 people in a group. We usually aim for about 6. 6 seems to be a good number. It's enough people. But for some of our projects where we have maybe 3 strands working in parallel, we'll have a group of 12, and there'll be 4 people working on each kind of strand of the project. And yeah, as I said, some are as low as pairs, 3s, depends on the project, the department, the time scale, but 6 seems to be a good, number if you need to start with something.
Yeah. We've seen also, lots of people have tried lots of different methods. The one I liked most was a colleague of mine, and I still to this day believe it's just he forgot to organise it the night before. But he decided he would format the groups in the order that the students turned up for the kick-off lecture at 9 o'clock on the Monday morning. Now, what that had the upshot of doing was, of course, those that were there at 8:45 and were eager got groups 1, 2, and 3. Those that turned up about 5 to 10 ended up in group 21 and 22, which is an interesting social experiment, because actually group 1 fell apart. Group 1 had all the big egos in it who couldn't get on with each other and just argued about everything, because they're the ones who always got top marks and just they couldn't agree on anything. Actually, the best group was group 21 out of 22, who, well, he characterized it, and I will characterize it almost verbatim, and I'm so it's not necessarily my characterization. Was they're the lazy ones who usually went and worked with the ones in group 1 and group 2, and suddenly realized that they were with all of the people like them and went, shit, I'm gonna have to work this time. And actually they were pretty good in the end. They were a really good group. But some of these social dynamics are, and we have had people try and do mixed ability. I don't like mixed ability. I think that's, I'm not sure, all sorts of social engineering has gone on group formation. And I'm not sure there is a good answer to it.
Yeah, the one condition we do tend to have is for the big groups, because there is a relatively low percentage of women in engineering. We try to avoid leaving just one woman with like 10 men. So that's the one kind of social engineering we do. But beyond that, I quite like random personally.
I was going to say that, in all of my team-based stuff, I do somewhat randomized and have a quick look to make sure that people aren't getting cornered, basically. Yeah. But, we have the same problem in economics also. We have few women, so it's, difficult not to have, majority men. Just try to make sure that the majority isn't, huge. Yeah. But that's also interesting, John, that, when you started saying that, I was thinking, well, all groups need leaders and team players, but maybe not, right? So maybe you just need some people to realize what the task is and get on with it, whoever does the leading or whatever. I guess one of the other questions that I had when you were talking earlier was about coming back to the marking and the assessment. So I know you use IPAC, and Clodagh is our resident IPAC expert. So actually, if there's a link to IPAC, Clodagh, that you use that you can drop in the chat, I think it's really, really an interesting way to do this. So the marking is the actual marks that you give is on the output, right? There aren't sort of process marks or anything in the interim.
No, what we do tend to do is structure our assessments. So you will submit something maybe halfway through a project, and we use it as a kind of, we have weekly meetings with students. We're seeing them on a weekly basis, but it's useful to get them somewhere so that we can say, actually, okay, you've done this amount of work. And we do sometimes, say you have to submit a draft, and then we'll give you feedback, and you have to reflect on the feedback, and that's where the marks are, is on the reflection on the feedback, and trying to kind of, particularly in the first year, give students this structure of, you need to do this, and you need to do this, and you need to not leave everything until the last minute, and try and give them a bit of structure. But we do tend to do it on outputs more than kind of process stuff. But those outputs tend to also describe maybe results that they've got from experiments that they've been doing, or what is your design process, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in some I've been involved in, we do try and get them to justify design. So although, they will end with on the Friday with some form of demonstration or competition or something like that. Actually, the one that works is not always the one that gets the highest marks, and that's something that occasionally needs a bit of justification. I always have in mind that in an ideal scenario, a bit more than half should get a reasonable working something at the end, whatever it might be, or get to an answer. If they all get it, it's probably a little easy. If none get it, it's very disconcerting. But you need enough, but not all. And it takes. I think this is the thing about keeping them for a few years, because it takes a couple of years to get that fine-tuned to be just right in terms of setting the problem. You can, we tinker with exactly what we're asking, but the general construction, particularly because you're often building a lot of context and putting resources about context around that you put a lot of effort into, and you want to keep going forward. But certainly in some of the scenarios we've had, I did one where we had groups of 4, and they were given us a slide deck with 4 slides. Each one had a different title on, so there was sort of a demo, and they were meant to show something and talk to each of the 4 sides, and we'd just get a few people in on their afternoon, 2 till 4 academics. We'd mark the whole lot in a group of 150 in 2 hours, and everyone would be in the dearly departed Jeremy Bentham before the day was out. The marks would be uploaded into Moodle, and everyone was happy.
Yeah, and I think that's the big difference between first and second years, is the first years think they have to get something that works, and that's how they get the marks, is it works. And we're like, no, we just want to know why you've got there. If it doesn't work, it doesn't. If you can explain why it doesn't work, that's fine. But the second years have got to, we've said that enough to them, they go, okay, yeah, because if this doesn't work, or if there's like some kind of terrible fatal flaw, then it's not the end of the world.
That's really interesting, because I've been hearing about colleagues who will set a programming challenge or something, and it's literally, if the program works, it's like that's the only test. But and I can see the benefits of that. But I think there's a lot of learning happening in all of the programs that don't work, right? Discovering what are the bugs in the system and so on. I guess the question then is, in terms of learning outcomes, sort of thinking about what you set out to do to produce these engineers, right? Not even in the first year or whatever it is. And then, of course, student satisfaction, which are not necessarily aligned, obviously. Where do you think you are, and sort of how would you judge where you've come in the journey?
I think in the learning outcomes, we've come a long way. I think we see quite evidently that the students, certainly some of their conceptual knowledge has improved. It's interesting, there was a big debate about whether exam results would improve on the basis of this. I'm not sure that exams are a great test of some of that conceptual knowledge, and so unsurprisingly, the overall marks haven't changed that considerably. And of course, we're supposed to, by letter of the Office for Students, we're supposed to teach them better but not give them any more marks, otherwise that would be grade inflation. So I think we're okay on that one. I do think that there is a difficulty with learning outcomes for the project-based elements, that you tread a fine line. The more you try and specify, particularly the learning outcomes in the way that often regulators would want you to do, you end up having to develop a project that is so narrow, if you want everyone to meet that a very specific technical learning outcome, that it becomes a bit of a toy project. And so you always, we try and set our learning outcomes quite broad in what we want the students to achieve, because I think we know they will learn good stuff. They will make connections of things. And actually, I think one of the strengths of the IEP from that aspect is that the projects really support the taught elements. And so actually a lot of the core learning outcomes are assessed through the taught elements, which gives us quite a lot of freedom in the projects of this place of making the connections and bringing them together. And a lot of the sort of skills and employability agenda come together there. I mean, the students love the challenges and the scenarios. They really enjoy that, which has been one of the reasons we ended up having to put them as singular weeks where all the lecturing stops, because effectively, despite the fact they carried very little marks, the students would concentrate far more on that than other things. And so actually stopping things has been a real benefit for that. I'd love to talk on student satisfaction, but I think you just look at our NSS scores and know we've still got a way to go. I mean, I I think the issue of what is good in the curriculum and the satisfaction of students are not as well linked as many people think it is. I think we have a much stronger curriculum. We teach it better. I think we let the students down in many other areas of general organisation and you know, and particularly later on in the program. I mean, I still, you know, I cannot think how many people are thinking to Fiona's course in the first 5 weeks of term when they're filling out the NSS at the end of the 4th year.
Yeah, I think learning objectives is really tricky for project-based learning because it's by definition an experience and we all experience it differently. Every student learns something different from it, and you talk to them and you'll find that they have learned different things. So I connected this, or I did leadership, or I did I learned this thing about myself. And that's really difficult to capture in like measurable learning outcomes. Oh yeah, you'll definitely learn how to lead. Well, at some point in the 2 years you will, but not necessarily in this specific instance. So it is really tricky, and that can occasionally come up against systems that would like very measurable ones. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the student evaluation comment that I love most about any collaborative learning is actually one that Clodagh shared with me, where a student said, what I learned is that I hate working with other people, which I think is an important lesson to learn. I mean, you have to, if you have to learn at some point, might as well learn it early rather than later. And I think, I don't know if you guys have this problem, but in economics, we have this huge problem of people have no idea what they're actually coming to do. And so they come in with very different expectations compared to, you know, what economics is and what we're trying to get them to do. So it's kind of set up for dissatisfaction in that way. So whatever else you do, you know, there are other issues, but given that people have these very strange ideas of what university is, what economics is, all of that stuff,
yeah,
you know, it's not going to match up. So that's a whole other series of questions. But just to end up, if I can just ask you guys, for people who are now feeling empowered to go ahead with project-based learning, what is one top tip that you would give them?
Be as creative as you like, because the students will be just wild. Any project you can think of, you know, don't, because the students will rise to the challenge. And that's the thing that I find the most fun and inspirational about doing it. It's really hard work, FYI. It's really hard work. It is easier to lecture, I'm not going to lie about that. But you spend like 2 weeks with students, and then by the end, you know, they start knowing nothing about the Thames or how to get rid of pollution. And in 2 weeks, they are pitching an entirely funded, thought out policy-based kind of solution to pollution in the Thames. And you're like, yes, you know, and it's just really brilliant, but it is super hard work. So just be prepared for that.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think you have to be a bit prepared to fail and to make it up on the hoof a little bit, be adaptive. I think if you want to plan everything, if you're a planner, don't overthink it. I mean, people, you know, certainly some of the early scenarios that people developed were very micromanaging of the students and structured and scaffold. And, you know, you've got to get in a bit of a mindset, and it's hugely enjoyable. It's very hard work, but it is hugely enjoyable. And you sort of have to, you know, I think the students are, they are more resilient and forgiving if you are in the journey, if you're with them and you're talking to them and supporting them. I mean, it helps to, you know, that gets more difficult as the groups get very, very large. But, you know, I mean, we try and, you know, although we've got 800 students, we try and break it down into relatively small sets. I saw some of the comments bristling about our level of resource. I mean, we do try and have a member of staff for 25 students. That's our dream on these things, and particularly because it is quite focused. So those members of staff are not doing, you know, this, you know, it is a very facilitatory role. There's little prep or anything else, and that's part of how we sold it. I was told that I couldn't overall increase the load on staff in the faculty by bringing these changes in. Now, that of course determines how you determine what the load on a member of staff is when you first start from. And if you design your starting point in a certain way, then that gives you a certain freedom as to where you end up. That said, we don't actually have problems getting staff to commit to this, and many of them we don't. You know, I don't know how. I assume as economists you might have a more rigorous workload model. We don't have very good workload models in most of our departments, quite frankly. So a lot of people are doing this almost as an extra for fun in many cases, which seems very bizarre. But a lot, particularly how to change the world, there's no sort of three-line whip necessarily for people to engage. A lot of the staff really enjoy getting involved in these things, which yeah, is an unusual place to be.
Yeah, I think the advantage of having like a week project or a 2-week project or a 5-week project is it's very time limited. You know it's going to be madness for that week, but it's just that week.
And there's no exam marking.
True.
What's not to love?
I think there are lots of individual preferences there, and I think somehow it mirrors what perhaps students feel as well, because you know, I'm with you guys. You know, I enjoy my team-based learning class more than any other class because I never know what's going to come out at the end of it. That's like the fun bit of it. But I can imagine many people not appreciating that, not knowing that. And again, you know, I am a planner, so I will have contingency plan B, C, D all lined up. So there are, even for planners, there is a way out of it. I need to be in control, but still there is a way out of it. But I think for students also, like, right, that you see that some just enjoy it. They do way more, not because of the marks or anything, but it's just the process. And I guess, yeah, it's just a matter of having enough lecturers who feel the same way.
I think one of the things that worked well in the IEP was because we had this strand that people came into, we could, and you know, a lot of other staff, you know, Professor X, who's been lecturing this same course for 20 years, could stay doing that, and there's enough around it. Yet we've got this really interesting strand of or other activities that people who want to get engaged can get engaged in. I think that's worked quite well, because yeah, you're absolutely right. For people who are not comfortable standing out or moving out in front of the lectern, it is a very different skill set that's required to do that. It can be uncomfortable. You've got to be the sort of person who does buy into the idea and wants to do it. Otherwise, yeah, it's tough, and not everyone is.
That's great, but I think it's a hopeful note to end on, that there's good things coming out of it. There will be hopefully a critical mass of people, lecturers also, who are willing to do this, because I think we're all agreed that this is good ultimately for employability, for all kinds of different skills at the end of the day. So hopefully between regulations, workload, individual preferences, we can find a way to do more of this kind of authentic learning. I'll end by thanking Fiona and John for taking the time in this very, very busy time to come. Thank you very much for everyone who's attending. And the recording has stopped as well. Hello to everyone on YouTube.